Alright, I'm gonna need you to stick with me for the topic of today's video as it's a little bit off the wall, but just hear me out. I don't know if this is just me personally and I'm the only one to have fucked up enough thoughts to think this, but sometimes in life I've wished that I've had a worse childhood. And before we dive even deeper into this topic, please just let me preface this discussion by saying I am extremely grateful for the family I was born into and how I was raised as a child. That's like one of the things in life that you don't have any control over is deciding whether or not you get born into this world and where you are placed either around the globe, whatever family you're put into, you don't have a say in that. And I'm very fortunate to have been raised by my parents and they have taught me well, and I'm very grateful for everything they have done for me. But this is kind of just like dark thoughts that sometimes creep into my mind, which aren't always the most politically correct, but here I am kind of exposing myself in hopes that you guys will find some benefit from this kind of discussion and hear what I have to say. And again, I understand that there are millions and millions of people in this world who are born into poverty or born into really shitty situations that they had no control over and they had no say in. I bet millions of people, like kids living in Africa with no food or water, would die and kill to trade places with me. And I recognize that this is a privilege to even have the thought of complaining, quote unquote, complaining, or even wishing about the idea of having a different childhood where I was in a worse off situation, because plenty of people would kill to be in my shoes, and I do recognize that before we get into this discussion. So with that out of the way, now I guess we can dive a little bit deeper into the discussion topic for today, and I guess why I would ever consider or ever want to have a worse childhood. Why would somebody even think that in the first place? So a lot of this relates to my attitude and philosophy of growth. So I personally believe that suffering induces a lot of growth, and that change and growth is a product of being in an uncomfortable environment and being able to navigate through these tough situations. So it's like I mentioned in my last video, where if you can find some sort of meaning in the suffering that you're going through, that will be a worthwhile experience for promoting growth. I guess we could go into kind of like a backstory of how I've experienced life up to now. I'm very fortunate to not have experienced many failures in life, which is kind of a crazy thing to say. Like, of course, I've had like failures here and there, like getting bad grades on a test or some other random shit, but up until like junior year of high school, most things in my life have gone my way, and I'm very grateful for that. Although in retrospect, now that I am where I am today, I do see that failure is a better teacher than success. So just going through school, along with my extracurricular activities that I pursued, I've always felt wins everywhere I went. So like I started up karate when I was very young, and I progressed all the way till I got my black belt in like 6th grade or something. And in 4th grade, I started playing the cello, and I would get honors orchestra like every single year without fail. I'm not trying to flex here, but I'm just trying to give an outline of how things have gone for me and how most things in my life that I've experienced have gone my way, which is ultimately, looking back, I wish it hadn't, and I wish I had experienced failure earlier on in life so I could deal with it more effectively now, but here we are. I was placed in advanced reading classes and math classes throughout school. I would make honor rolls, I would have great grades, really nothing to complain about. So when I encountered my first like milestone failure that I can actually remember very vividly in my life, it was an interaction with a girl that fell through and I got my heart broken. So that is the first failure that I've like really been able to recognize and has been very significant in my life in order for me to incite change. And once I went through that whole breakup process and eventually reformulating my perspective on like dating and interactions between men and women, it also got me onto my self-improvement journey. And through that whole process of choosing delayed gratification over instant gratification, I formulated this hypothesis that I mentioned earlier, that suffering produces an environment that will incite growth if you have the right mindset and if you have the right attitude when thinking about suffering. Because if you just put someone in a shitty situation and they don't know how to deal with that and they don't have the right mental frameworks in place and they don't have a strong mindset to try to find the meaning in the suffering and adapt and overcome this suffering, then they're probably going to be screwed. But once I went through like some trials and tribulations through my self-improvement and kind of found the beauty in failure and the beauty in suffering and experiencing pain for growth, as weird as that sounds, but that's kind of how I began to view obstacles in my life, which I think on one hand is kind of healthy if you take it not entirely to the extreme and be wishing for a worse childhood, which I can kind of understand where that gets a little bit out of hand. But I know you've seen those like success stories on YouTube or on Instagram or whatever social media platform. And maybe that's also a problem in this thinking, is that I found it off of social media. Like the classic rags to riches story, that this person comes from poverty, they had a fucked up family, and they had to kind of make it out of the mud and the trenches in order to see success. Hearing that kind of story made me want to kind of participate in that myself, rather than my story, which was, oh, I had a great family. And again, not that I'm not grateful for it, but my story is that most things in my life were good when I was growing up, and I didn't really have any need, or there wasn't like a fire under me that was forcing me to incite growth in my life. I guess it was kind of out of one instance of suffering and my first experience with failure. But if I had been put in a very awful environment to start out with, then I guess my thought process would have just been that then I would have had more external pressure on me to make significant changes in my life and kind of get on this grind that I'm on right now, but much earlier on. So this is basically just the explanation of why I wish I had a worse off childhood, is because that external pressure would have forced me to create change in my life a lot sooner than I did. Still, again, grateful for everything that I have. I do not want that to be ignored in this conversation, because of the fact that I recognize that this is very much a privilege to be able to wish that I could have had a worse off childhood. I know that millions of people would, in a heartbeat, switch places with me. I'm not trying to glorify extreme situations of poverty or instances of mental or physical abuse. That is not my goal here. It's kind of just to explain my ideology in how I think about suffering and what role it plays in terms of creating growth. In my personal life, that's how I've seen it, at least. And I hope that maybe you've learned something from this conversation. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.